before the first word was etched into the scrolls of man. There was a thirst that knew no name, a silent predator prowling the borders of the soul where the forest meets the void. To truly grasp the horror of Elder Scroll vampires, we must first acknowledge that they are far more than just monsters in a video game. They are a profound sociological reflection of our deepest cultural anxieties. Whether it is the Romanian Strigoi manifesting a fear of premature burial, or the Chinese Jiangshi personifying a terror of the stolen breath, these legends prove that every civilization builds its own nightmares to safeguard its children and police its taboos. However, in the brutal reality of the Elder Scrolls, these are not merely cautionary folktales used to keep people out of the woods. They are a literal, metaphysical play, a geopolitical middle finger pointed directly at the gods above. To me, the existence of vampires in Tamriel represents the ultimate theological rebellion, a state of being that deliberately breaks the sacred cycle of life and death, turning the soul into a weapon and a prisoner all at once. Instead of going about the general depiction of vampires as to how they came to be first, I'd like to first explore the origins of vampires in real-world folklores and what it means in sociological and anthropological sense. The Romanian Strigoi is one of the original European vampires existing before the English word vampire was coined, which came with Slavic roots. In Romanian tradition, Strigoi are malevolent spirits of wicked individuals who rise from the grave to prey on the living by drinking their blood. They are known to prowl the silent forests at night and transform into owls, not bats. The reasons behind the Strigoi's existence are speculated to include fears of accidental live burials, rabies, and as a cautionary tale, to discourage children from venturing into the woods at night due to threats of wolves and similar dangers. In the 19th century, Scottish folklorist Emily Gerard collected Transylvanian folktales that included stories of proto-vampires like the Strigoi. Her writings inspired Abraham Bram Stoker, a writer who had never been to Eastern Europe, to create the iconic vampire story, Dracula. Stoker's Dracula draws from various Eastern European vampire folklore and introduces a distinct sexual dimension to vampire lore, reflecting the Victorian era's anxieties and taboos regarding sexuality. Interestingly, Dracula himself was intentionally designed to be unattractive, but his actions, such as blood-sucking, are often interpreted as metaphors for sexual assault. In China, the Jiangshi is a creature that seeks life energy. Unlike European or Slavic vampires that feed on blood, Jiangshis consume the breath of the living. The folklore surrounding Jiangshis involves elements of magic, kwai or life force, improper burials, and malevolence in life. A prominent method for dealing with Jiangshis involves using a Taoist talisman on the creature's forehead. While there might not be academic sources to support this theory, it is suggested that this exorcism method reflects Chinese culture, essentially acting as a symbolic way for the exorcist to command the vampire to leave. The aforementioned information is to highlight the strong connection between the cultural origins of supernatural creatures like vampires and their depictions in fantasy settings, both as a storytelling device and as a cultural reflection. In the Elder Scrolls universe, vampires are real beings, which differs from our world where they are fictional. This reality in the Elder Scrolls challenges the thesis that the vampires are reflections of a culture's fears, as stated before. And there are two important points to consider that makes vampires so interesting as a storytelling device. First, that disregarding the cultural aspect wouldn't be enjoyable, and second, that both thematically appropriate and inappropriate creatures can contribute to engaging and believable storytelling. Vampires in Elder Scrolls are in a sense tortured souls. Yes, they're immortal. And yes, they get to slay their enemies and dominate their underlings in ways mortals could only dream of. But ultimately they are slaves to their thirsts and find little comfort in life, or unlife, perhaps outside of momentarily fulfilling these desires.
Still always hungry. There's no prey down in this hole. Need to hunt more. All this hiding and skulking around. Blood. So hungry all the time now. Need to hunt again soon. Maybe the clans have it right. Hunting's so chancy. Why not keep a few thralls?
Every time they have a moment alone, they're left facing this reality, which is compounded the longer they live, and by each new chaos they unleash on the world. Sooner or later, this pain becomes so great that the only way to escape from it is to only become more bloodthirsty in your conquests, which only adds to the problem. They still have personalities, they're still capable of restraint, and they're capable of drawing amusement out of whoever crosses their path, be it righteous warrior or unfortunate cattle, but ultimately their existence is defined by endless thirst and servitude. From Opusculus Lame Ball to Mezzamorti, as brighter grows light, darker becomes shadow. So it passed that the Daedra Molag Ball looked on Arkay and thought the Edra prideful of his dominion over the death of man and Myr, and it was sooth. Ball, whose sphere is the wanton oppression and entrapment of mortal souls, sought to thwart Arkay, who knew that not man, nor Myr, nor beast folk of all Nirn could not escape eventual death. The Edra was doubtless of his sphere, and so Molag Bal set upon Nirn to best death. Tamriel was still young and filled with danger and wondrous magic when Bal walked in the aspect of a man and took a virgin, Lame Bialfag, from the Nedic peoples. Savage and loveless, Bal profaned her body, and her screams became the shrieking winds, which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim. Shedding a lone droplet of blood on her brow, Bal left Nirn, having sown his wrath. Violated and comatose, Lame was found by the nomads and cared for. A fortnight hence, the nomad wordwoman enshrouded Lame in pall, for she had passed into death. In their way, the nomads built a bonfire to immolate the husk. That night, Lame rose from her funeral pyre and set upon the coven, still aflame. She ripped the throats of the women, ate the eyes of the children, and raped their men as cruelly as Bal had ravished her. And so, Lame, who is known to us as Blood Matron, imprecated her foul aspect upon the folk of Tamriel and begat a brood of countless abominations, from which came the vampires, most cunning of the night horrors. And so was the scourge of undeath wrought upon Tamriel, cruelly mocking Arkay's rhythm of life and death through all the coming eras of the 8 Ada, and for all his sadness, Arkay knew this could not be undone. Lame Bialfag, to be blunt, is a literal and metaphorical rape allegory. As priestess of Arkay, her violation and transformation into the first vampire is a direct insult at Arkay, the god of cycle of life and death. As the first vampire, the state of Lame Bialfag is arguably worse than being a zombie in the context of Arkay, as unlike zombies, vampires are a walking perversion of life and death at the same time, being the literal limbo of the two states. One particular thing to note, Lame Bal states, "You sought to poison us with your blood, but we survived and from your poison we grew." Taking that line into account could suggest that Molag Bal didn't intend for her to live or vampires to come into existence for that matter. The beliefs about the origins of vampires vary, and not all vampires are thought to be linked to Molag Bal or Daedric origins. Some stories suggest that vampires can be created through mortal experimentation with magic. In the Iliac Bay region, people believe that the vampires can be created either through magical artifacts or as a result of a wizard's curse. In the Third Era, dumber nationalists held the belief that vampirism originated in the West through necromancy and couldn't be native to Vardenfell. They attributed this to the Tribunal Temple's efforts to suppress vampires and their cultural aversion to necromancers and foreigners, whom they blamed for introducing necromancy to their land. These beliefs may align with common misconceptions about necromancy and vampirism that persist among the public. In the canon, the weirdest vampires that we know of comes from northern Valenwood. They are the Bonsamu, who look like Bosmers, unless shown with candlelight, the Kirilth, who can turn to mists, the Yekif, who are vor enthusiasts, and the Telboth, who prey on children's. Valenwood is a dangerous place. In the lore, Valenwood is a largely uninhabited forests with trees so tall that their canopies shroud the undergrowth in near perpetual gloom and darkness. The dominant inhabitant of Valenwood, the Bosmer, either live in along the coasts or in the great oaks that lurch above its smaller kin. Despite their connection with the trees, the Bosmer themselves are no apex predators, because if they were, why would they even bother? with innovations of civilization such as bows, spears, and of course, portable light. The Bonsamu are seemingly the personification of the primal fear of a dark forest and can be driven back, or at least made vulnerable when held under the scrutiny of a civilized candle. However, candles don't light forever, and sooner or later, the light will snuff itself out and the darkness will return. The Kirilth also thematically tie in with the Hungry Forest theme Valenwood has, though instead of darkness, it's the mists. The mists, like darkness, not only provide cover for dangerous predators, but they are also omnipresent. Valenwood, after all, is mostly a forest, yet untouched by civilization, and mists are often thick in these places, leading to the impression that one is always watched by something they just can't see. Anyway, in regards to vampiric lore, the Kirilth seems to be a play on the traditional European vampire myth, in that their weakness is running water. The Yekif is not only reminiscent of snakes, but also of the fear of disappearance. Popular depictions of animals hunting people as food are often messy affairs with cloths and blood everywhere. The truth is less dramatic. People tend to disappear outright when they decide that humans are on the menu. But to the topic, the Yekif's feeding habits could be interpreted as a perversion of the Green Pact, where a Bosmer must feast on their kill, though in the Yekif's case, they're just multitaskings. The Telboth is very evocative of changelings with theories of these stories as attempts to explain deformities and neurodivergent children. While these tales speak to the fears and imagination of mortals, the reality of vampirism reveals something far stranger and far more potent than mere folklore. Vampiric blood is far more than a source of hunger. It is a substance of profound power. Even minute quantities are said to strengthen the life force, allowing mortals to cling to existence when all hope seems lost. Legends speak of vampires reviving those at the very brink of death, staving off ailments that would kill ordinary men. Their blood can counter lethal poisons, purify diseased flesh, and even heal afflictions that defy conventional medicine. Take, for instance, the ostracoratic fever, a virulent, magical plague that turns living flesh into coral-like growths, highly contagious and resistant to conventional cures. Many scholars believe it was crafted by the Slode using a blend of necromantic sorcery and thaumaturgy. Attempts to halt its spread only accelerate its progression, yet the infusion of vampiric blood can counteract its effects, halting the coralification and restoring the victim's vitality. The process of becoming a vampire in Tamriel is as much metaphysical as it is corporeal. Mortals we recognize as vampires are mortals infused with a very specific strain of Daedric energy. In the case of pure-blooded vampires, this energy flows directly from the Daedric prince associated with vampiric dominion, such as Molag Bal. Others achieve their unholy state by siphoning power from a fellow vampire, while many are afflicted through a virulent disease that serves as a proxy, bridging Daedric power into the mortal soul. Regardless of its origin, the result is the same, a being attuned to night and shadow, compelled by hunger for blood, weakened by the sun, and marked by an insatiable craving for life essence. Some scholars note that certain vampiric transformations are even alchemically induced, the product of forbidden experiments by mortals dabbling in necromancy or blood magic, although these artificial strains rarely match the potency of natural Daedric-afflicted vampires. Vampirism manifests not only in the body but in the soul, through what might be described as two forms of corruption, external and internal. External corruption occurs when a magical object or entity infuses a mortal with Daedric influence, subtly altering personality, desires, or worldviews. This form of corruption is seductive, but can often be mitigated through ritual, alchemical treatment, and even lifestyle changes. Adjustments as simple as diet, meditation, or exposure to sanctified ground may help restore balance, redirecting the mortal's path away from the shadow. Internal corruption, on the other hand, is far more insidious and dangerous. It represents a long-term, intimate integration of Daedric energy into the heart and soul of a mortal. Daedric princes excel at this form, manipulating the desperate or ambitious through bargains, temptation, and coercion. Mortals corrupted in this way carry a permanent foothold of the Daedra within them. They are often unaware of the subtle erosion of their autonomy until the effects are irreversible. While theoretical purification is possible, the effort demands both extraordinary magical intervention and a profound desire to be freed from the Daedric touch. More often than not, those afflicted embrace the corruption, finding in it a dark empowerment, a voice whispering promises of strength, immortality, or vengeance. These willing participants become the true vampires of legend, their souls intertwined irrevocably with the night. Beyond these metaphysical considerations, vampirism confers a wide array of physical and mystical enhancements. Vampires heal at a remarkable rate, can manipulate shadows and necrotic energies, and often gain access to powers forbidden to mortals. Yet every gift carries a cost: sensitivity to sunlight, a constant craving for blood, and the social alienation of living in darkness. Different strains of vampirism, influenced by geography, Daedric patronage, or alchemical experimentation, result in wildly divergent abilities, appearances, and vulnerabilities. A vampire from Skyrim may differ in form and temperament from one in Cyrodiil or Black Marsh, reflecting the mutable, evolutionary nature of the curse. Vampirism in Tamriel is more than disease or curse. It is a nexus of body, soul, and Daedric influence. It is simultaneously a weapon, a poison, a blessing, and a prison. Those who carry it walk a narrow line between mortal frailty and near-divine power, their lives a testament to the seductive, corrupting, and transformative nature of the Daedric touch. Yet this dark gift does not wear one face alone. Vampirism in Tamriel is far from a uniform curse. Across the provinces, it manifests in numerous strains, each with its own peculiarities and dangers. Much like Bloodlines, these strains evolve over time, adapting to local magics, climates, and even cultural practices. The result is a wild diversity of vampiric forms, each requiring its own methods of study, avoidance, or eradication. While a full catalog would be overwhelming, here are the most significant and infamous strains I could find that are known to scholars and adventurers alike. Firstly, we have Noxiphilic Sanguivoria, tracing its origins to Lamé-Bialfag. During the Second Era, Noxiphilic Sanguivoria is among the rarest strains of vampirism. Unlike common vampires, those afflicted with this strain resist the debilitating effects of sunlight and instead gain strength under the moon's gaze. With every feeding, their power grows, in stark contrast to other vampires who weaken with each act of predation. Perhaps the most striking trait is their ability to shroud themselves in mist, an eerie cloak that allows stealthy movement and lends an air of supernatural mystery. Avoiding full vampirism in this strain is possible through timely intervention. A priest of Arkay can purge the disease, and abstaining from the blood ritual, essential for the complete transformation, can prevent the onset. Curiously, the only way to acquire true Noxiphilic Sanguivoria is through exsanguination. The victim's blood must be replaced with that of Lamé-Bialfag herself, a process that underscores its extreme rarity and mystical nature. Next is Porphyric Hemophilia, often referred to simply as the vampire's disease. Porphyric Hemophilia unfolds with cruel precision. Its incubation period lasts 3 days, during which victims experience declining stamina and a creeping sense of lethargy. On the third night, the transformation is complete. The afflicted becomes a vampire, their body and mind reshaped to serve the night. While the initial infection can be treated if caught early, the vampirism that follows is notoriously difficult to reverse. Porphyric Hemophilia shares traits with other strains like Sanguinare Vampiris and Noxiphilic Sanguivoria, including the physical and supernatural alterations that make full vampires dangerous and tragic figures, caught between humanity and the eternal curse. Next is Sanguinare Vampiris. This is the most widespread and classical form of vampirism, particularly prevalent in Skyrim. Sanguinare Vampiris follows the familiar 3-day incubation period, after which victims experience heightened thirst for blood and vulnerability to sunlight. While early-stage infections can be cured, those fully transformed face a grim struggle to reclaim their humanity. Despite its prevalence, Sanguinare Vampiris is considered less exotic than strains like Noxiphilic Sanguivoria, yet it remains deadly in the hands of cunning or desperate vampires. Next is Valkihar strain, Originating from Molag Bal himself, the Volkihar strain grants the infamous Vampire Lord transformation, a form that elevates a vampire's power dramatically.
There is but one gift I can give that is equal in value to the Elder Scroll and my daughter. I offer you my blood. Take it and you will walk as a lion among sheep. Men will tremble at your approach and you will never fear death again. You contracted a disease, perhaps, but you are no true vampire. Accept my gift and I promise that you will learn the difference. Refuse me and I will banish you from this castle. I will spare your life this once, but after that, you are prey. Perhaps you still need convincing. Behold the power! This is the power that I offer. Now, make your choice. Be still.
Those afflicted can channel dark magic and immense strength, yet they retain many of the vulnerabilities of traditional Sanguinare Vampiris, weakness to sunlight, and the constant need to feed. This strain is most closely associated with the Volkihar clan, who are among the most powerful and organized vampire factions in Skyrim. Next is Chaotica Vampiris. First encountered during the events of the Elder Scrolls Online, Greymoor, Chaotica Vampiris represents a modern, experimental evolution of vampirism. Unlike traditional strains, it targets existing vampires, altering their physiology through chaotic creatia harvested from Cold Harbor. The result is the creation of Blood Knights, vampires of unmatched speed, strength, and ferocity. This strain exemplifies the mutability of vampirism and the influence of Daedric forces on mortal bloodlines. Next is Onde strain. Unique to the Somerset Isles, the Onde strain is believed to have originated among Altmer alchemists experimenting with prolonged life. Onde vampires possess subtle but dangerous abilities, a natural talent for stealth, mild resistance to sunlight, and a heightened sensitivity to magical auras. They are often mistaken for skilled mages or sorcerers before their predatory nature is revealed. Next is Vardvark strain. Rare and poorly understood, the Vardvark strain appears primarily in Morrowind. Victims of this strain exhibit grotesque physical mutations, including clawed hands, elongated fangs, and an unnatural pallor, but in return gain extraordinary resilience and regenerative capabilities. This strain is often associated with the Ash vampire cults, who embrace the curse as a gift from their dark gods. Lastly, there is Hemo-Magic Vampirism. A recent emergence in Black Marsh and parts of Cyrodiil, Hemo-Magic Vampirism is linked to Argonian necromantic rituals. Unlike other strains, it allows the vampire to manipulate their own blood as a weapon, forming blades or tendrils in combat. Though limited to certain regions and species, it demonstrates how vampirism adapts uniquely to local magical practices. Each of these strains illustrates the diversity of vampiric affliction in Tamriel, from the mist-shrouded Noxiphilic Sanguivoria to the brutal Blood Knights of Chaotica Vampiris. Every province offers a different form of horror. Vampirism is not merely a disease, but a living, evolving phenomenon, one that reflects the history, magic, and darkness of Tamriel itself, and, similar to bloodlines and strains, there are countless clans of vampires over different regions of Tamriel. Detailing all of them would take forever and would read like a laundry list. So I am just going to go over some of the most prominent clans briefly that I personally find fascinating. At first I have Montelian clan, led by a daughter of Cold Harbor. This is their claim of superiority against the other clans. It is one of the vampire bloodlines of the Iliac Bay area. Those of the bloodline are gifted with the ability to cure paralysis and the power of teleportation. The bloodline dominates the area around the mouth of the Bielsi River. They are the enemies of the Selenu bloodline. And in number 2 is the Vreseth clan. It's possible that this group could be a remnant of the Crimson Scars, or it might be an entirely new assassins guild. Notably, the Crimson Scars were vampiric assassins who separated from the Dark Brotherhood in 3rd Era 421. The Crimson Scars might make their return in the Elder Scrolls 6. However, resurrecting the Crimson Scars might be challenging, considering their leader eventually came to believe that Sithis did not intend for the Dark Brotherhood to consist solely of vampires, likely because Molag Bal is the creator of vampirism. To make this concept work, one could imagine a scenario where a member of the Crimson Scars disagreed with Greywind's second vision, prompting them to split from the group and depart for Hammerfell with a small faction of like-minded individuals. This splinter faction might choose to follow Molag Bal or refrain from aligning with any specific Daedra or deity, deviating from the traditional Sithis worship of the Dark Brotherhood. At number 3 is the Anthodus clan. In addition to their other advantages, these vampires possess the ability to conceal the outward signs of vampirism, allowing them to seamlessly blend into human society. They have established control over a town or city, where they actively deter vampire hunters by employing their private mercenaries. These mercenaries are tasked with hunting down vampires, but their efforts are carefully directed solely against rival vampire clans and lycanthropes, ensuring the safety of the vampire inhabitants. It's possible that within this group, there exists a faction that desires a cure for vampirism, leading to internal divisions and conflicting goals. The majority of these members covertly live in Hegeth, where they assume the roles of priests and priestesses of Morwa, the Yokudan goddess of fertility. They tend to the local temple and interact with citizens while concealing their true identities. Underneath the Temple of Morwa, there is a concealed tunnel leading to a Dwemer ruin in the western Alikar Desert. Interestingly, these members do not worship or utilize the shrines dedicated to Morwa themselves. Instead, they have mortal associates who assist in maintaining the facade and appearances on their behalf. At number 4 is the Selenu clan. The Selenu are a vampire bloodline found in the Iliac Bay region. Those of the bloodline are resistant to elemental attacks. Heavy Molag Bal worship in this clan, and arch enemies with the Montalian clan who also worship Molag Bal. The bloodline is named after Selenu, a Nedic tribal elder of the Wyrd from ancient Skyrim who ordered the attempted cremation of Lamé Bal, the first vampire. At number 5 is the Kalari clan. It is a vampire bloodline in the Iliac Bay region, known for their unique ability to paralyze their victims. They have a strong presence in Hammerfell. The Kalari bloodline is in opposition to the Anthodus bloodline, considering them as enemies. At number 6 is the House Ravenwatch, based in Rivenspire, is an altruistic vampire group led by Verandis Ravenwatch, a pure-blooded Altmer vampire. They adhere to a code emphasizing honor, vigilance, nobility, and restraint. Their main mission is to use their vampiric powers responsibly to assist others, only feeding on willing servants and avoiding excess or feeding on outlaws. They undergo regular training to control their urge to kill. House Ravenwatch welcomes vampires who follow Verandis's code, conducts historical research, and works to keep other vampire bloodlines and clans in check. Due to their inclusive nature and mentorship, they function more as a clan than a specific bloodline, accepting vampires from various bloodlines who adhere to the Ravenwatch code. At number 7 is the Volkar vampires in the eastern Skyrim. According to lore, dwell beneath frozen lakes, emerging only to feed. They possess the ability to freeze their victims with icy breath and can reach through ice without breaking it. They share similarities with Cyrodiilic vampires, such as night vision, invisibility, and the power to control mortals. Some Volkihar vampires appear more monstrous, with unique features and have distinct abilities, including reanimating the dead and resistance to sunlight, though it weakens them. They employ deathhounds as guardians. Ancient Volkihar vampires, like those at Castle Volkihar, are pure-blooded and can transform into vampire lords, gaining additional powers such as summoning gargoyles. They often use thralls when feeding and occasionally feed on sleeping mortals. In the Second Era, a subset of the Volkihar clan fed exclusively on animal blood. At number 8 is the Nighthollow clan, who utilized the void and used said void energy to sustain themselves, as blood gave them no nourishment. They ruled the Reach and were dubbed the Night Lords by the Reach folk. The Dwemer inhabited Blackreach in order to mine Ethereum from its depths. Eventually, the Dwemer would go to war in the Ethereum Wars, which destroyed the underground city-states of the Dwemer in Blackreach. At number 9 is the Scion of Bloodmatron, or Lemay's bloodline, another clan, or sort of vampiric cult, who are the direct lineage of Lemay Bal. They are transformed in a ritual called the Rites of Scion. In a ritual, a mortal is introduced to the bloodmatron by a scion. The mortal is given the title of Initiate, and the scion becomes a blood speaker. The blood speaker prepares symbols related to Arkay and Molag Bal, and then guides the initiate through a series of steps, including drinking from basins, learning about Lemay Bal's history, and defiling the symbols. Finally, the initiate is willingly drained of all blood by the blood matron, who may revive them with her own blood if she deems them worthy. Vampires are seen as afflicted victims suffering from a disease. Scions, however, are directly blessed by the blood matron, granting them stronger blood, greater power, and enhanced beauty. Scions, who are offspring of the blood matron, refuse to bow to anyone as they are no longer bound by servitude. While they choose to serve, the blood matron wishes for her children to unite and subjugate their enemies, making them subjects instead. In a curse, they condemn Arkay for abandoning them in darkness, but they have thrived and grown stronger in that darkness. They now feed on Arkay's followers to gain strength to conquer him. They also curse Molag Bal for trying to poison them with his blood, but they have grown from that poison and are now determined to defile and destroy him instead. As the first vampire, Lemay Bal can modify existing vampire strains or create new ones, like the blood scion form that she devised and reversed the correlation between power and hunger. She can also seemingly exert control over vampires in her bloodlines. As in, she can restrict their power, erase their memories, prevent them from transferring vampirism, etc. Given the presumption that all these bloodlines endured into the 3rd century of Tamriel's 4th era, one could envision the Montalion and Vrasith bloodlines as still holding prominence within the Werest and Daggerfall kingdoms in High Rock. Simultaneously, their rival Anthodis and Selanu bloodlines might remain prominent within the Alik'r Desert and the region surrounding the city of Sentinel and Hammerfell, respectively. Beyond these clans already discussed, other major bloodlines hold significant historical weight. The Cyrodiilic Vampirum Order, sometimes called the Order of the Virtuous Blood by their detractors, perfected the art of assimilation in the Imperial Heartland. Their strain allows for relatively normal appearances, reduced aggression, and predictable feeding cycles, enabling them to blend seamlessly into Imperial society for centuries. Their existence explains why widespread vampire panics did not destabilize the Septim Empire to the degree seen elsewhere. In Morrowind, the Burn, Ande, and Quara bloodlines developed unique adaptations. The Burn favors stealth and agility. The Ande cultivate arcane mastery and sorcery, and the Quara embrace brute physical dominance. Their divergent traits reflect the cultural fragmentation of Vvardenfell itself, and suggest that vampirism in Morrowind evolved along competitive, rather than cooperative lines. In Black Marsh, accounts of the Wet Fang describe a clan that treats vampirism as a pragmatic disease, fed upon strategically, hidden when necessary, and utilized to enhance tribal influence rather than reshape society. Their approach emphasizes that vampirism interacts with culture rather than overriding it. Taking a longer historical view, one can easily imagine many of these clans surviving well into the 4th era, with the Iliac Bay continuing to be shaped by the Montalion and Vraseth in the north and the Anthodis and Selanu in the south. Rivenspire, as always, would remain a haven for Ravenwatch influence, while Skyrim would struggle with periodic Valkihar resurgence whenever mortals grew complacent. The most significant shift would not be territorial, but ideological, a future in which Molag Bal's supremacy over vampirism is contested not from the outside by Arkay, but from within by Lemay's children who resent both abandonment and subjugation. In such a world, vampirism ceases to be merely a curse and becomes a geopolitical force, fragmented, adaptive, and increasingly unwilling to remain in the shadows. However, all such futures hinge on one question, far more profound than borders or bloodlines: why Arkay or any of the Aedra did not help Lemay Bealfag in her greatest time of need. This question lies at the very heart of the Elder Scrolls' interpretation of vampirism. To understand the origins of vampirism, we have to look not just at LeMay's personal tragedy, but also at the cosmic implications of what Molag Bal was actually attempting to do.
When I was a priestess of Arkay, Molag Bal ravaged me and left me for dead. A group of nomads tried to purify me with fire, but I awoke, changed.
Poor girl. May these flames purify her spirit.
Elder, what do you believe happened to her?
Her body was mangled, rent apart by a terrible darkness. Its corruption is still on her. I can feel it.
Is it true her wounds healed on their own?
Yes, that is why I insisted we perform this rite at once.
Elder! The girl!
No, we're too late.
No,
Back away!
Molag Bal, father of torment, we curse you! You sought to poison us with your blood! But we survived, and from your poison, we grew! King of corruption, your children are coming! They will defile and destroy you! When I saw what I had done, I called out to my god, Arkay! I prayed that he would rid me of Molag Bal's curse, but Arkay did not answer. Arkay! Answer me! I am your priestess! Answer! Molag Bal said you would not come. He said you turned your light away from me. Arkay! Do you hear me? You are false! I reject you! Arkay the Forsaker, we curse you! You left us to suffer in darkness! But we survived, and in darkness we grew. And now we feed upon your bones. We will use their stolen strength to conquer and consume you! Initiate. Kneel in the black pool and submit yourself to me! Children, this is your kin. Life still flows within its blood. Tear it out, drain it, so that it may join us! Now you are one of us. I offer you a gift. The catacombs are filled with the Defiler's cultists. Sneak up behind your prey and feast. Relish your new powers. Embrace my blessing.
LeMay's defilement was not just an act of cruelty, nor merely a violation of mortal flesh. It was a deliberate assault on the foundation of Nirn's metaphysical laws. Arkay is the steward of the cycle, the one who oversees the transition between life and death, birth to burial, blood to soil. Molag Bal's corruption of LeMay was designed specifically to break that cycle, to create a state of being that is neither living nor properly dead, a condition that Arkay himself did not, and perhaps could not, fully account for. This is where the argument in defense of Arkay becomes relevant. Arkay may not have been able to intervene because LeMay's corruption fell outside the two domains he governs. What Molag Bal created was a third state, a blasphemous loophole in the cosmic rule set, where a body is denied the release of death, but also denied the sanctity of life. If Arkay is the gatekeeper of endings, then vampires are those who refuse to pass through the gate at all. And if that is the case, then LeMay's corruption wasn't merely an affront to Arkay. It was a form of jailbreak, the metaphysical equivalent of breaking out of Arkay's jurisdiction entirely. Molag Bal, being both pragmatic and sadistic, likely took measures to shield LeMay from divine contact, not only to torment her, but to assert sovereignty over her soul. Many scholars have argued that LeMay's story marks the first recorded instance of Arkay's law, the metaphysical principle that denies the undead the right to burial rites, precisely because Arkay had no framework for what she had become until after the fact. LeMay's transformation was unprecedented, and because it was unprecedented, it broke the rules before the rules even existed. There is also the narrative dimension of LeMay's despair. A Upon becoming the first vampire, she lashed out in grief and fury, committing atrocities against her own tribe. These were not acts of survival, but of spite and contempt. Only after her bloodlust abated did she turn back toward the divine, crying out to Arkay for release or forgiveness. But by then, she was no longer the innocent shepherdess she began as. Her plea came not from a dying soul reaching out to the cycle, but from an undead being demanding mercy from beyond it. Arkay's silence in that moment can be interpreted in two ways. Either he did not hear her because she was no longer part of his sphere, or he heard her, but could not answer because she was now owned by another. Either interpretation suits the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls, where gods are bound not by sentiment, but by function. To understand the could not part, we have to examine how the Edra themselves are situated in the architecture of Nirn. The divines are frequently criticized for their absence or their perceived indifference toward mortal suffering, but this criticism only makes sense if one assumes the Edra are omnipotent, omnipresent, and omnibenevolent in the real-world theological sense. They are not. The Edra sacrificed vast portions of their power to create the material world, and in doing so they became bound to it. Their power is expended not on smiting enemies or micromanaging mortal affairs, but on maintaining the continuity of existence itself. Their role is not to interfere in every tragedy, but to ensure that the sun rises, the seasons turn, gravity pulls, souls pass, and the world does not tear itself apart. This is why the divines often appear strangely restrained compared to the Daedric princes. Each divine represents a domain that contributes directly to world stability. Mara's compassion, Zinathar's fair labor, Kynareth's breath and winds, and Arkay's proper stewardship of beginnings and endings. They are non-competitive deities by design, and their worshippers reflect this. You do not see Mara's priests denouncing Arkay's priests for doctrinal impurity. They coexist because their gods must coexist for the world to function. In contrast, the Daedric princes are not burdened by such constraints. They can violate, break, torment, and unmake because nothing depends on them to hold Nirn together. For Molag Bal, creating vampires was an act of iconoclasm, proof that the Edra's careful system of transitions could be corrupted, bypassed, and mocked. The simplest metaphor for the Edra is that they are a constellation of programs sustaining the operating system of reality. They execute tasks according to the functions they sacrifice themselves to create. They are active, but their activity is structural rather than interventionist. Mortals only notice them when they stop, for example, if Akatosh ceased to sustain time, or if Arkay ceased to govern the passage of souls. Bishop Artorius Ponticus was correct when he said that Akatosh is the most active of the divines, because we perceive him every moment the clock continues to tick. His involvement is constant, seamless, and therefore invisible. The irony is that mortals, being emotional creatures, interpret divine non-intervention as divine negligence. They look up at uncaring skies and see useless gods, while simultaneously excusing Daedra for their atrocities by appealing to their nature. The same people who call Arkay lazy for not resurrecting LeMay will argue that Molag Bal is not evil, but merely consistent with his sphere. Yet the victims of Daedric cruelty can hardly be blamed for feeling abandoned. To mortal eyes, desperate, grieving, anguished, the Edra's structural contributions are, while Molag Bal's violations are loud. And in the moment of need, when a soul cries for rescue and no hand descends from the heavens, it is difficult not to feel betrayed. LeMay's tragedy captures this tension perfectly. She was not merely corrupted by a Daedric prince, she was severed from the cycle that made the Edra relevant to her in the first place. Vampirism in the Elder Scrolls is therefore not just a disease or a curse, it is a theological rebellion, a metaphysical middle finger pointed at Arkay himself. The gods of order cannot always save those who fall outside their system, and the gods of chaos delight in creating those very exceptions. That is the true horror of LeMay's tale, and the true origin of vampirism in Tamriel. And mortals, confronted with this cosmic blasphemy, did what mortals always do. They formed institutions to contain what the gods would not, and thus birthed the vigilance of Stendarr. To be clear, The vigilance of Stendarr existed long before the Dawnguard's resurgence, and for a time they were the closest thing Skyrim had to a structured anti-vampire institution. Yet, to understand their failure, it is essential to understand why they were formed in the first place. The Vigil was not conceived as a vampire hunting order, but rather as a post-Oblivion crisis reaction to the perceived moral and spiritual decay of Tamriel. With Daedric cults proliferating in the shadows, mortals trafficking with princes for power, and the trauma of the Oblivion Gates still fresh, the Vigil defined its mission around opposing Daedric influence in all its forms. Vampirism, being tied to Molag Bal, was merely one of many expressions of that corruption. In the Vigil's eyes, vampires were not existential enemies, but simply another unclean heresy to be purified alongside necromancers, witches, and artifact collectors. Their worldview was spiritual before it was strategic, and moralistic before it was militaristic. Prior to the rise of the Dawnguard, Skyrim's Vigil contained two ideological camps. The first were the Zealots, who believed Stendarr's command required preemptive crusading, fortification, and readiness for war. The second were the more casual patrolmen and preachers who saw their work as a kind of religious policing, traveling the roads, blessing villages, confiscating Daedric relics, and cracking down on small cults. It was from the first group that Isran emerged, distinguished not by piety, but by his ability to recognize that vampirism was evolving into a coordinated threat. The rest of the Vigil treated vampires as isolated vermin rather than as a hidden aristocracy plotting a long-term agenda. When Isran finally became disillusioned with the Vigil's complacency, he took the only members who understood the vampire problem with him.
Damn fool. I told him not to go. The Vigilants always had more bravery than sense. Did you at least find out what the vampires were looking for in there?
Once those extremists and pragmatists departed, what remained of the Vigil in Skyrim was ideologically rigid but strategically toothless. The post-split Vigil drifted into dysfunction almost immediately. No one seemed willing to acknowledge how dangerous the emerging Volkihar network truly was, so they returned to their comfortable routines of roadside sermons and shrine blessings rather than preparing for protracted conflict. In a world where vampires fed discreetly and avoided the sun, the Vigil could have persisted indefinitely. Indeed, in such a world, the Dawnguard itself might have been the faction doomed to collapse, spending resources on an enemy that never escalated. But the world the Vigil received was one in which Lord Harkon was actively conspiring to blot out the sun and usher in a new age of vampire dominion. Faced with this reality, the Vigil's lack of preparation became fatal. Part of their failure stemmed from a profound misunderstanding of their enemy. Vampires in Tamriel are not merely undead predators, they are agents of Molag Bal, participating in a cosmic project defined by domination, violation, and the bending of mortal will. This gives vampirism a political and theological dimension that the Vigil never grasped. While the Volkihar possessed courts, seers, infiltrators, thralls, and an elaborate network of maritime logistics across the sea of ghosts, the Vigil fielded priests with maces and faith in divine protection. They possessed no spies, no counterintelligence, no knowledge of Molag Bal's cultic structures, and no understanding of the vampire clans' social hierarchies. They believed vampires could be treated as Daedric abominations, to be smitten rather than as organized political actors with long timelines and concrete ambitions. Compounding this was a tragic irony within the Vigil's own theology. Stendarr, revered as the divine of mercy, compassion, and righteous justice, became the banner under which the Vigil pursued a mission of absolutist purging. For them, mercy toward heretics and Daedra-touched mortals was indistinguishable from enabling corruption, yet Stendarr's doctrine was never written as an endorsement of blind eradication. In many respects, the Vigilants were fanatics who did not actually understand their god. Their extremism thus derived from a misreading of their own scripture, allowing their piety to mutate into ideological zeal. And despite the theatrics of their faith, they lacked the sober realism required to counter a Daedric project of domination. Isran's radicalism must therefore be understood in contrast to the Vigil's fanaticism. where they placed their trust in righteousness, uttering variations of, "Stendarr will protect the faithful." Isren placed his trust in siege engines, fortified battlements, silvered weaponry, drilled troops, and contingency planning. His approach was not born of hatred but of realism. When he looked at the state of vampirism in Skyrim, he did not see abominations to be cleansed. He saw enemies preparing for war, and because he understood that war would eventually arrive, he structured the Dawnguard accordingly. Had he reformed the Dawnguard without a credible threat on the horizon, his efforts would have been perceived as paranoia or religious extremism in their own right, and the faction might have collapsed for lack of purpose. But in the presence of Harkon and the Volkihar, Isren's foresight became vindication. The destruction of the Hall of the Vigilant by Volkihar forces was not merely an act of brutality. It was a strategic demonstration. The vampires deployed reconnaissance, infiltration, surprise, and overwhelming force against a religious order that believed faith and purity were sufficient protection. The massacre exposed every flaw Isren had warned about and revealed the Vigil to be a faction optimized for roadside crusading rather than for existential conflict. They were prepared for sinners, not soldiers. And in the face of a highly organized Daedric aristocracy, purity alone could not save them. In the end, the Vigil of Stendarr did not fail because it was weak, but because it was misaligned. It confronted vampirism as a moral stain to be cleansed, when vampirism was in fact a geopolitical, theological, and cultural threat. Their refusal to adapt, their overconfidence in divine protection, and their inability to interpret Molag Bal's project on the correct scale ensured their downfall. They believed that righteousness alone would triumph. Isren believed survival required preparation. In Skyrim, it was Isren, not faith, that was proven right. Thus, to understand the limits of mortal resistance, we must compare vampirism with another form of extended life leechdom, a self-fashioned state of undeath mastered by only the most disciplined and powerful necromancers. In the simplest of terms, vampirism in the Elder Scrolls is a form of disease, whereas leechdom is a form of transcended state of being. As stated by Vastery, a Sigic companion to Manamarco and Venus Galerian, and a leech dedicated to Azura herself, leechdom is the pinnacle of undeath, achieved by powerful necromancers who manipulate their own souls to gain immense power and extend their lives. To become a leech, one must channel their soul through a phylactery, a complex and arduous process requiring a lifetime of study and strong will. This separation of soul and body removes limitations on magical abilities, offering virtually limitless potential. Whereas one could become vampire just by transferring the disease from another vampire or perform Daedric rituals, both resulting in varying level of power, considering the purity of said strain. Purest or true blood vampires who have gained the power directly through Molag Bal would be a very strong vampire lords, whereas others would be average superhuman blood-sucking creatures. While contesting between these two, however, at the first sight, it does seem like vampirism is much more appealing than leechdom, considering you keep your mortal body, become virtually immortal and young, while getting superhuman strengths along with multiple other powers. Personally, if you are someone who is highly ambitious, leechdom offers you immense power over vampirism, considering you do not just become immortal, but you are also invulnerable, resurrecting oneself every time you fall. Plus, the magical abilities you can master is virtually infinite, because now you have your magical limit broken, with your mortal soul gone. This is why the most ambitious and highly talented individuals seek leechdom instead of vampirism. With characters like Manamarco surviving throughout the ages and even ascending to literal godhood, it's fair to say, even though it seems similar at face value, vampirism's still a disease which happens to you, whereas leechdom is something you seek out. Ultimately, what this tells me is that vampirism in Tamriel is less of a simple curse and more of an evolving, predatory ecosystem that refuses to stay in the dark. While many view these creatures as mindless, evil, thralls, I see them as individuals, ambitious, tortured, and occasionally even altruistic, who are forced to navigate a world that wants them erased. We must distinguish between the disease of the common vampire and the calculated, transcended power of leechdom, but both paths highlight a singular truth. The pursuit of immortality always demands a terrifying price. Whether you choose the path of the noble Ravenwatch or the blood-soaked dominance of the Volkihar, you are stepping outside the jurisdiction of the gods to claim a strength that is as seductive as it is corrupting. In my opinion, as long as the Daedra continue to mock the laws of the Edra, the night will belong to those who were brave or desperate enough to outgrow the poison of their own blood. They are the masters of the unend, the flickering candles in a cathedral of shadow, dancing forever on the edge of a dawn, that which will never arrive.
And once again, thank you for being here. Be kind to yourself, and I'll see you on the next one.